Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Your Health. My name is Purity Museo. Now, December 1st is World AIDS Day, and this year's theme is ending the HIV epidemic and what needs to be done to address this gap. What are some of the challenges that people living with HIV face tonight? We speak about HIV and AIDS, and we have a very special guest here, Doreen. She is a champion for HIV and AIDS, and later on this show we'll be joined by Faith Mwende. Faith is an advocacy manager at the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, AHF Kenya, and we'll be having this conversation in the next 20 minutes or so. So thank you for joining us and welcome to this show. You can be part of our conversation this evening by tweeting us or even interacting with us on our social media platforms at KBC Channel 1 at Purity_Museo, and the hashtag to use is Your Health KBC. Welcome once again to the program. It's nice to have you, Doreen. Good evening to you. Thank you for coming.
To you, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you are a champion for HIV and AIDS. You are one of the young Kenyans living with HIV. Maybe you can take us through your journey. When did you find out that you had the virus?
So I was born with HIV 29 years ago, and I have lived with it practically my whole life. But my parents found out about my HIV status 21 years ago. That was in the year 2000. And I was 8 years old, but they did not tell me that I have HIV. I was told 5 years later in 2005, and also the same year that I started my ARVs.
When they told you that you have HIV and AIDS, maybe did you have any knowledge about what the disease was all about?
When I was told I was 13, so I did not really take it like a serious thing.
Yeah.
To me, it looked like another outing to the hospital that my mom would take me to and buy me nice food, that is chipo and chicken. And also I would stop taking my Septrin because that time there were no ARVs when I was diagnosed. But later on we were given Septrin. So I never liked the Septrin pill because it was very huge. But with the ARVs, they were a little bit smaller and very colorful. So to me that made me happy at that particular moment.
So at what point did you realize that it's a lifetime, or it's a virus that I'll have to live with it for quite some time? And what was your reaction like?
The reality hit me when I was going to Form 1 the following year, but it was not that, that impactful, because I was like, okay, my mom, because since my mom refused to let me go to boarding school, I was like, I can manage. But now when she let me go to boarding school in Form 3, I now faced the reality of having to lie to the other students about the treatment I was on. Because, in boarding school, it's a shared space. They will come, look into my box, see strange pills, and they ask, what are these for? And they will say they're for a heart problem, because nobody will stigmatize you for having a heart problem. And my parents had told me, don't tell anyone that you have HIV. So saying I had a heart problem was easier for me. But that was one of the times I started realizing that people living with HIV are not treated like normal people in society. Yeah.
And at what point did you come out, as now Doreen, you're saying now I'm boldly coming out that I am positive, and it's high time that I face this reality?
Well, that happened after 2011. No, rather, I came out officially in 2015, but in 2011 I had stopped taking my treatment, and I don't know whether you heard the story of Babu Loliondo. So I had gone to Loliondo with my mom, and we had basically taken the Loliondo cup and assumed that we were HIV negative. So later on, after stopping my treatment for 2 years and getting an opportunistic infection, and almost coming, because by that time my viral load, that is the level of HIV virus in my blood, had really gone up to 200,000 copies. And that is dangerous for anybody. So that was one of the awakening moments for me to see that there's more to life than just hanging on to me as a person with the self-pity and living with HIV, that I had to come out of that shell.
That was in 2015?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get back to you. I'm glad we now have Faith Mwende. Thank you so much for making time for us. We really do appreciate and welcome to the show.
And thank you for having us.
Yes.
Hi, Doreen.
Hi, Faith.
A very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we are just having a conversation with Doreen when she realized, or she was informed, since she was born with the virus, she had it, and the challenges that she had to face. And finally, when she decided to come out boldly and say, now enough is enough of hiding. Let's talk about HIV. Let me just get straight to you, Faith.
Yes.
As a stakeholder in the country, let's talk about where we are as a country as far as addressing HIV, especially on the stigma, because this year's theme is on stigma and dignity on, for people living with HIV. Where are we as a country?
Let me start by appreciating that you are having this and hosting this kind of show.
Yeah.
That is part of the processes of breaking stigma. And let me say that as a country, we've made milestones, quite a lot of milestones. We can say that the infections, new HIV infections are reducing, so that's a big plus. However, we know that there's so much which plays a part in the data that we see. And yes, when it comes to stigma, I would say that we are not where we were in the 90s. However, we still have a lot of stigma. And that's where you will realize that as a country, the people living with HIV, there are those who are publicly talking about HIV and their status, but we also have a large population which suffers from stigma, where be it at home, be it at school, be it at the workplace, we still have many people facing stigma. And for sure, as a society, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do collectively so that at the end of the day we reduce stigma? Because the moment we reduce stigma, the first thing that will rise is the number of people seeking actually HIV testing services.
Currently, how would you describe the burden of the disease in the country?
The burden is still high because you realize that we still have about 1.1 million people living with HIV, which means that all those people living with HIV need their care and treatment, but at the same time, that's also an indicator that prevention with positives is very important, because it takes, we need to put the person living with HIV at the center place, that they are going to look at it and say that prevention starts with me. And you know, that's an angle that I usually admire, because per se, we are not talking of prevention in isolation. We are talking of prevention where people take different roles and different responsibilities. Yeah. And so for me, it really is that, yes, we still have the burden. And yes, we are celebrating that we are having reduced new infections. However, infections which we call the vertical infections, or what commonly people talk of mother-to-child transmission, we still need to do much more because we have many women not going for HIV testing during pregnancy. So at that point, they're not certain of the HIV status, which means then the chances of infecting their unborn child is high. It's
very high. Okay, we'll be talking about testing for HIV and the importance of it. Sure. Doreen, let me come back to you. You're saying that 2015 is when you decided that you're going now to come out strongly and say, this is what I am, this is who I am. So what made you come out? What was going on? And please combine that with, at some point, did any of your friends realize that you had the virus, and what was their reaction?
My friends never knew I had HIV up until when I spoke about it publicly. What really happened before I came out publicly was we went to test some students in an institution. So the thing is, they refused to come get tested. So we spent, like, the first 3 days, there was nobody. We just seated the whole day. Then one time, I don't know, you know, there's a way that you, something just happens to you and you're like, what if I just share my story? What is the worst that can happen? So I sent an email to one of the editors for the local dailies. And in my head, I was very sure she was not going to respond. Then she responded and she was like, Doreen, this is such a lovely story. So how about we do an interview? So because I had not told my parents yet, and my parents don't have, like my mom is HIV positive, but my dad is negative. So they're a discordant couple. So I did not want my dad to face stigma for being in a discordant relationship. So I had also to ask consent from them and say, hey, I kind of shared my story. And then now later on, I started doing now the advocacy in the schools and telling the students the importance, because most people think that HIV is physical. And if they look at you, they will say you're HIV positive
healthy,
or you're negative.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And it has nothing to do with your physical appearance. It's all about, it lives in my body. That is the thing. So nobody is going to pick you out and say, you know, there's a way. When HIV first came, people used to be very thin, you know, the physical appearance. So you could tell this person has, this one doesn't. But now we are at a point where we have treatment. So we all look the same. So why would you look, Kenyans like saying unapima na macho. So mbona tunapima na macho?
Yeah, mbona tunapima na macho.
Yeah.
Okay, let me come back to you, Faith. We are talking about, she is talking about that she was born with the virus. Let's talk about the transmission. Most people do not understand how this is, so that we don't say I am single and I am okay. How is, let's explain the basics. What is HIV? How is it transmitted? Yeah.
And quite interesting.
Yeah.
And I say that in Kenya, it's not a matter of lack of information. It's a matter of processing the information and putting yourself in that space. Because per se, even in primary school, a child will tell you what is HIV. They tell you human immunodeficiency virus. Yes. And we know the modes of transmission. One of them is what I'd spoken about, vertical transmission. And I usually like calling it vertical because let us not place it on a person, mother to child. But publicly people call it mother to child, because then the chances of infecting an unborn child when a person is positive and not on medication is high. The second one is, would say, actually it's sex, and protected sex with a person who is infected. And there are things around, would say, blood transfusion, but nowadays we know that there's a lot of screening that is going on. So per se, the larger percentage of infections would be through unprotected sex with a person who's infected. And nowadays science has advanced, and Doreen will be talking about that if the person is not virally suppressed, and then we have, obviously, if a mother was pregnant and was not put on medication, then there's a chance that she will infect her child. And unfortunately, even people knowing this, they will still use what she was saying, the kipimo cha macho. I look at you and I'm like, you look healthy.
So what are the symptoms and the need for testing?
I would say the most important thing is a person to go for HIV testing, because as it is, yes, we have many signs and symptoms. However, they are not where science has got us, and the availability of services. We are not at the point where I would look at a person and I would easily know, because initially, many people are not receiving interventions early. So you'd find people who have thinned, people have skin infections, people have diarrhea, TB coming in. But nowadays things have changed. So I'd say it's quite important for a person to know their HIV status. Because one, the moment you know, you go for an HIV test, you will then know if you are HIV positive or not. And that helps you to be either put on treatment, because science has shown that initiation to HIV medication early helps you live a more productive life, reduces the chances of you getting opportunistic infections like TB, and also helps you live a full life. And with that, then it's very important for a person to go for an HIV test. More important is for a woman who is expectant. Unfortunately, you find that many women go to the health facility, apate the purple booklet, ndio ende akazae. They're forgetting that the moment you go early to the health facility, not only are you tested for HIV, you're tested for other STIs and other conditions, which are both beneficial for you as a mother, but also for the unborn child.
People may not experience symptoms, so
Yes.
it's always important for you to go and get your test.
Exactly.
Okay, Doreen, how has it been like living with HIV at this era?
I can say at this era it's easier because we're coming from a point where there was zero treatment and zero hope. And you know, the treatment took a very long time before it came to us. And people got desperate. We went for prayers, we took herbal treatment. At one point, my mom was told to slaughter a goat, atupatie the matumbo inside. For real, these are things that happened. So right now, when it's test and treat, it's very easy because you started on treatment early. Your viral load is very okay at that point because it's manageable. Your CD4 count is also okay because it's also manageable. So basically, at this era, people who get HIV in this era, for them living with HIV is easy because there is treatment, there is counseling, there is basically everything available for us.
There is the right treatment.
There is the right treatment, not way back then where it was just a matter of guessing.
And the willingness, because there is available treatment, then why are we not ending this epidemic, Faith?
I would say there are many factors in play. And let me pick from what Doreen said. When treatment for HIV started, it was bora dawa. You know, we are desperate. Whatever you give us, it's okay. But we are an era where it's dawa bora. So the medication currently is with lesser side effects, which means then people are more productive and they live healthier lives. And so that's something that we need to appreciate, that science is advancing. However, again, the willingness is not from it's all collective. I would say there's willingness in policy makers. Are our policies at par with what the WHO has given? Are our policies at par with where science is and research?
You can tell us, are they?
I would say Kenya is really advancing in terms of policies, actually. We adapt quickly. In terms of policies, as a country, we adapt quickly. And also the movement of people living with HIV, they are well placed to understand this is what is at the WHO, and we want it in the country. So I would say in that space, there is both push by people living with HIV and government is receptive. Where I think we need to invest more is for the access of medication, access to diagnostics, and access to monitoring. When I say access is that we need to have an investment by both government and donors for HIV medication. Unfortunately, the HIV response is heavily donor dependent. And I would say yes, government has been putting in some resources, but we'd like to see more. So our policymakers, especially legislature, where they put in budget allocations, would like to see more. Would like to see more investment in that. Yes, there's allocation, but then does that translate into the purchase of the items? When it comes to diagnostics, for you to be put on HIV treatment, you really need to know your status. So someone has to fund the HIV test kit which is available. That again calls for both government and also donors. And that's why it's all inclusive. And lastly, there's monitoring. Doreen has rightfully said that when you're put on medication early, then your viral load is managed. But then you have to know then, as a person living with HIV, at what level are you at? Because is the drug working for you? And that's why the viral load test is very important. And we have then adequate resourcing for the viral load test. And that's something that we now need to get into deeper, because the science is moving very well. The willingness by the people living with HIV is there. Are we putting in then policies and resources to fund the policies? And that would be very important, because at the end of the day, the person who's living with HIV will have quality life if everything else is working for them, including proper resourcing. We are living at an era where donors are reducing the funding towards HIV. So which means if the donor is reducing by 5%, we need to see government placing in, increasing by 20%, so that by the next time our donor is reducing, we are ahead. And so that's something which is quite important for us, both by our members of parliament who are our representatives, but also who allocate resources. And once the resources are allocated, then we hope that the technical team at the Ministry of Health will ensure that then we have adequate purchases and adequate stocks, and that the quality of what we offer is at par. So I'd say is all of us play a role, and for all of us to play a role, the one thing that we need to have at the center is to ensure that resources are there, because the moment resources are there and science is advancing and the people living with HIV are willing, then we'll be at par.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I'm sorry to Ed not mentioned it, is that we also need to resource, and a lot of resources need to go to empowering the people living with the infection, because some years ago when we had the real push, we had a lot of community awareness. I think you remember when we used to have nearly every township, there would be some buses about people talking about HIV. We need to go back there, because that will break stigma. But we also need to empower people living with HIV with treatment literacy, so that they can talk more and realize that actually this is where we need to be. Not everyone is at the level that Doreen is. So we need a lot of resources for that. And lastly, we also need resources for community support groups. Nowadays, it's not every other day that you're going to a health facility, but living with a chronic disease requires a lot of sharing, a lot of safe spaces, and that's something that we need to see as in terms of, as we advance in the science, let us also not lose out on these other aspects, which are all very important for the person.
I think Faith, you've summarized it all. Thank you so much. I think we have to wrap it up. I'll welcome you winding remarks in 30 seconds only, because she's already spoken about what we need to address as a nation.
So to me is, as we head towards World AIDS Day, I want everyone, because HIV is everyone's business, whether you're positive or negative, it is all our business. So we collectively can end stigma. We can choose to see the human and not see the virus. So let's be better, let's do better, and remember, HIV is very preventable, and you can always prevent it.
And that is going to be my slogan: you can choose to see the human and not the virus.
Not the virus.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doreen. Thank you, Faith, for coming and for accepting to be part of this conversation that is very educative and at the same time enlightening. I do appreciate. Thank you for watching Your Health Show this evening. My name is Purity Museo. You can always be part of our conversation online at KBC Channel 1 at Purity_Museo, the hashtag Your Health KBC. I'll see you again next time. God bless you.